Welcome back to the show. Tonight we're going to talk with Seth Breedlove, the director of the new documentary On the Trail of Bigfoot. And for those that remember Alan from last time with talking with Jason Warfice about the Vermont Bigfoot encounters and beyond, do you guys think that if we start doing Bigfoot talk, do you think that Alan should take the lead? We believe so. Enjoy. Welcome everybody back to the exciting episode of the Everything Horror Podcast, and tonight we got two helpers and we got the interviewee for his latest documentary that was released on March 29th, 2019, entitled On the Trail of Bigfoot. Now, with me is my lovely fiance, Tessa Baker, and joining me back is my good buddy, Alan. Welcome back, Alan.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
Finally, yeah, you're very welcome. And then finally, we are here with the director of the On the Trail of Bigfoot, Seth Breedlove. Welcome, Seth.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And Seth, this is out of curiosity. I was kind of reading about you. You were also the creator of the Small Town Monsters. Do I want to say company?
I mean, it's actually a production company and the name of the film series. So yeah, either way works. We really like the branding, so we just keep reusing it.
Awesome. If you don't mind me asking, how did you come up with Small Town Monsters?
Yeah, well, I grew up fittingly in a small town myself, and when I became interested, I guess, in like the paranormal and cryptozoology, it was centered more on how these strange monster and UFO and cryptid cases, the paranormal, can affect sort of rural communities where they take place, and a lot of that was driven by my interest in a local monster case from the 1970s that involved like this family that lived on the outskirts of a small town near where I grew up, who started having encounters with this upright walking hairy monster on the hill behind their house that eventually sort of culminated with the death of their dog, which seemed to be ripped out of its chain and having its neck snapped. And that case was called the Minerva monster case. And I'd grown up near that town, Minerva, and I somehow had never really realized that was the town where that case was centered, just because the town itself really did nothing to sort of, advertise the fact that was their local monster case. And that really drew my attention because I was aware that the case had been huge. At the time when it happened, it had been covered by newspapers across the United States and other countries as well, including like Germany and Japan had sent news teams here to cover it. So it was one of those things where I was really fascinated by the fact that this huge piece of local history had seemingly sort of been lost to time. So I decided to make a documentary about that series called Small Town Monsters. Now, originally, the name Small Town Monsters was given to a guidebook that I was going to write that was being pitched to publishers, just called Small Town Monsters, a case file. And that book was sort of unanimously rejected by every publisher I sent it to. So we just switched gears and started turning the individual chapters into documentaries. And we started with Minerva Monster in 2015. And then in 2016, we made Beast of Whitehall, and Boggy Creek Monster. And in 2017, we made the Mothman of Point Pleasant and Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. And in 2018, we made the Flatwoods Monster on the Trail of Champ and the Bray Road Beast. And this year so far, we've released on the Trail of Bigfoot and Terror in the Skies, which is our look at flying cryptids in the state of Illinois, comes out on June 7th, and then in October we're releasing Momo, the Missouri Monster, which is what we're shooting right now. So it began life very humbly, and it's still very humble, but it's definitely grown quite a bit since we started.
That's awesome. I mean, any type of monsters where we get interested in it, and it sounded like from the documentary you kind of got into it at a young age, and you must have gotten into like the crypto stuff, like probably wanting to know more, like what else is out there that most people kind of keep a closed mind on and don't really think of what really could be out there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it wasn't actually. I was older when I gained an interest in it. It was actually like in the last probably 12 years. So I was probably in my 20s. But yeah, it's definitely driven by the fact that you want to know, obviously if there's any reality behind the subjects, but also just the stories themselves are so fascinating and creepy, and I'm a storyteller, so I like stories, and that's kind of what it's driven by.
That's awesome. And since I'm not really too familiar with you guys for the Small Town Monsters, now, is all your productions kind of like a mini series, or is it just this one? Or like this one as in I should say like the On the Trail of, because I saw like you also had like On the Trail of Champ and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. So no, the films are feature films. There's some of them run short film length. Usually, I think our shortest is like 40 minutes. So we have 3 shorts that run under an hour, and then the rest of them are like feature length films. But On the Trail of is our foray into episodic storytelling. So we started with On the Trail of Champ last year, which actually was directed by my friend Alexander Pedikov. And then this year we did On the Trail of Bigfoot, and in 2020 we'll be releasing On the Trail of UFOs. So it's a way for us to sort of experiment with different types of storytelling beyond just feature length documentaries, and just a totally different approach in general, because the films have a much more like cinematic approach to the storytelling style, and they delve into like they've become more and more stylized, like each one of them. So we do a lot of like really complicated lighting setups and all that kind of stuff. And they're focused on recreations and animated sequences and that kind of stuff. And On the Trail of Champ and On the Trail of Bigfoot are much more, guerrilla filmmaking style, one-man band, cinema verite sort of storytelling, rather than the stylized approach we take to the films, which is fun for us, because I mean, again, it's just when you're putting out this many projects, I think the biggest thing is that if you can switch up the way in which you're telling stories, it'll keep it interesting for us as a company. So it's partially driven by a fear of boredom.
Wow,
that's good.
That is, and to dive into the On the Trail of Bigfoot here now, one of my questions is, like, when you go into a post-production to try to figure out your next project, how do you guys, especially if you're doing like a series of On the Trail of, how are you picking in this case, your monsters or your creatures to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's always driven by the human element more so than the monsters themselves. Obviously, we have these subjects that we're somewhat interested in, but it really tends to come down to how interested we are in the stories of the witnesses or investigators that are looking into these subjects. And On the Trail of is a totally different approach from even from the films, the way we approach those tends to be that we travel to a location, and this is what we're doing tomorrow. We're traveling to a location. We set up shop at like a area B&B or like a hotel or a rental house, and we are there for like X amount of days, usually 4 or 5 days, sometimes 6 or 7 days, and we shoot the entire movie. So we get all of our B-roll there, we get all of our interviews done, all that stuff, and that is it. We come home, we shoot the recreations usually here in Ohio, and then we edit the movie. On the Trail of is, it's much more seat of my pants. It's flying. Usually we are bundling that trip into like the shooting trip into another event that we're already scheduled to do, which is how we keep our budgets so low. So it's really the entire approach to both, the films and the miniseries is totally different. A lot of the interviews that I've shot for On the Trail of was just spontaneous. Like someone happened to be around that I knew I wanted to speak to, and we just interviewed them on the fly. So, but when it comes to witnesses and things like that, it's always driven as much by their stories as it is like an interest in a particular monster or paranormal subject. There's a really fascinating, angle to a witness's story. I'll tend to gravitate toward that story over one where it's just a really, sweet monster tale.
That actually, you sort of answered one of the questions I was going to ask you about, but I think it sounds like you're sort of exploring it a little bit as you go. Obviously, Bigfoot is such a big topic, and there's so much that you could and can cover. And I was just curious how you approached, breaking down what you were going to explore in that. But was it more kind of finding it as you went, and the people like one thing sort of led to another? It does seem like you did a lot of traveling and a lot of location based. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was like 14. It was 14 different states of shooting and over 20 interviews, and like 22 different people interviewed. There was at least 1 or 2 interviews where people were sitting down together. But it was, over 20 interviews is pretty crazy. And I shot the whole thing myself. There was never a film crew with me, so it was always done by myself. Yeah, the approach
looks great.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it a lot. But yeah, the approach was kind of, I had an outline that I was supposed to follow, but the outline was so large, originally, unrealistically large. Like, I think originally it was like a 12 episode miniseries with episodes clocking in at like 45 to 50 minutes, which on the budget, if I could have done, I would have loved to, but on the budgets we're working on, like, this was made for basically $5,000, but it was actually made for less than that because some of that includes like the marketing budget. But the actual filming budget was probably more like 3,000. So yeah, the approach was really to follow this episode guide, but the episode guide was pretty quickly falling apart as I was shooting it, because I was like realizing there's no way I can do everything I wanted to do. So what ended up happening was I got into post-production and had to feel my way in the dark, like through the storytelling. Because for one thing, I'd never done anything that was quite, definitely not episodic. I'd never done anything that was episodic. And that was a steep learning curve, and one that I really didn't have. I guess I hadn't predicted it or anticipated it being as difficult as it was, because every episode got edited probably 4 or 5 different times. And some of the really early episodes, like the first episode, there's a version of that out there that is where I'm not in it. And this is like the first time I put myself into one of our projects. I've always hated the very thought of doing that, but on this, it ended up being sort of a necessity, just to streamline the way the story was being told. So there was this whole thing where originally there's a cut of like episode 1 where it's just me narrating, and then it's trying to be one of our movies, but without the budget of one of our movies, which just made it seem like a I don't know, a scaled back sort of doll version of one of our movies. So we ended up really approaching it much more investigatively. And then, like, all of a sudden I realized, like, all of a sudden in late November, I was like, well, crap, now I have to shoot at least a few of these investigative, quote unquote expeditions into the woods with people, because I loved episode 5, which is entirely out in the forests of southeastern Oklahoma, with a group that's out trying to kill Bigfoot. And I loved the way that episode came together. And so we started calling other groups and being like, look, can we, come out with you guys and sort of document what you're up to and things like that. And then once I had that, then the episodes started falling into place, and it still does. Like, all the episodes that are there were part of my original outline that I did like over a year ago, but they're just, it feels very different from what I had originally sort of envisioned this being. And I'm glad, like, the trial and error process of this has been great as far as like envisioning how the next On the Trail of miniseries is going to be. So I love the investigative aspects of this, and even my approach to the way I was shooting it will probably change somewhat for the next one, just because I learned so much from how I shot this one. So the approach was mostly figured out after it had already been shot, just because it was really like fly by the seat of your pants filmmaking. I don't know that I've ever done this sort of thing where you went in this blind and just kind of hoped everything came together.
Right. No, that's really impressive and great. I was going to ask you what kind of research you went into it, beforehand. Is it like, how much of that was it? So it sounds like you did a lot of, I guess, pivoting and adapting as you went. I did, but like a lot of the research was stuff I already. This is going to. Stuff I kind of already knew, because I'm a Bigfoot dork. Like, I've been into this for like 12 years, and I did a Bigfoot podcast, and I used to do archival research for a website, like turning up historical accounts from like the 1800s and early 1900s, and a lot of that was put to use in the first like 2 episodes of the miniseries. So there wasn't like a ton of background research needed, but as far as like the investigative side of it, I spent like 3 days in the mountains of Oklahoma, trying not to get eaten by bears and snakes and black widow spiders and mountain lions. So, that kind of thing obviously was totally different from the behind the computer sort of archival research that I'm used to. But it was also, this is probably the most fun I've had making anything, or if not the most fun, it was definitely the biggest sort of experience I've had, making anything, because you just felt like every single time you went out to shoot, you were learning a dozen different aspects of the craft that you never really, that I never really knew, because I never went to film school. So all of this, I feel like every time we shoot anything, I'm learning things I should have known all along as a filmmaker. That's great. That's you're doing a great job for sure. It's really expertly put together, and I think that does just go to show you got to get out there and do it, and it's a lot less about, I guess you can learn a lot of things, but getting out there and doing it, it's hard to replace the experience of that kind of thing. But
yeah, thanks.
Have you found that actually, was that your first time going out into the field and really doing that kind of extensive, research out there in terms
like field investigations and stuff? Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Because like I've never considered myself like an investigator or a cryptozoologist or a Bigfooter or any of that stuff. Like I'm first and foremost a storyteller and a filmmaker. So that, and I'm an enthusiast, like a casual sort of amateur enthusiast in these subjects, and that's it. Like, I don't consider myself some sort of expert, and I get phone calls every week from like television shows wanting me to come on and be like one of their talking heads, and I never do it because I don't feel like I first of all, I don't really want to brand myself that way as like an expert, because I'm not, and I don't really know that anyone is. But yeah, for sure, this was the first time I really went out and was in the field with other people who are actively trying to have, interaction with whatever's out there. And it was like that stuff is super interesting to me, and it's one of the things that really appeals to me about On the Trail of versus the films, because the films are much more centered around one isolated incident in a world community, and it's not necessarily that we're going out trying to find any evidence that whatever is being talked about actually happened. We're just there to document the story, and this is much more of like investigative storytelling rather than the retellings that we're doing in the film. So that, again, like the best thing about it so far has just been being able to switch up the approach, the editing style, like the whole thing. It just feels like a totally different beast from the films.
That's cool. Did anything while you were, throughout this entire experience of this particular subject, did anything surprise you in terms of what you felt you knew ahead of time? And because again, if you've done a lot of research, you kind of had a good background already on the subject. Did you find either that maybe your outlook or your ideas about the subject changed at all during the process, or did anything in particular really surprise you while you were out there, or while you were doing this research?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me most, I think, was that you kind of think you have Bigfoot people pegged, like how they, who they are, right? Like and I've never necessarily got into like stereotypes of Bigfooters as being solely, like the camo wearing, six pack in the forest crowd, even though there are definitely, that's a contingent of the Bigfoot community.
Right.
I had never really bought into that, and I think this is like one of those situations where even some of the investigators who I went into thinking I knew who they were and what they were about, like there were still times where I was surprised with like how passionate and enthusiastic some of these people are about the subject, and how some of the people aren't solely motivated by like fame, which unfortunately is like, I guess it's maybe for some people it's not, unfortunately, but to me, like, that subject is so full of, all of the paranormal really is so full of people that are really just chasing like fame in some capacity, because it's very easy to become somebody in the Bigfoot world. And so many people are out there chasing that, but and I think maybe to some extent I'd become a little jaded about that. And there were times on this series where it was like a very welcoming realization that it's not solely about that for a lot of these people. Like some of these people who are not in all the documentaries and who aren't really out there making movies about themselves or whatever, and I say that tongue in cheek, obviously, because I put myself in this series, but some of these people are just enthusiastic about the subject, and they want to know the truth behind it, or they want to document their own little their own avenue, like the thing that they're sort of chasing within that realm. I mean, Mark Marcel, who's featured heavily in episode 1, that guy is making kind of a name for himself within the community, but it's solely because he's really fascinated by old monster reports that involve like attacks, like monster and ape attacks on people. So he started looking into the Ape Canyon incident, and that's been his like sole focus for years. Now he's getting into other aspects of that particular strange subject matter, but I just thought he was so cool because he was clearly just super enthusiastic about that story, and he spent so much of his own time and money like researching that, that little side story. And it's something about it's something about the early guys that were into the field. Like in episode 2, we focus heavily on the 4 horsemen of Bigfootery, and that's John Green, Renee Hinden, Grover Krantz, and Peter Byrne. And like Byrne and those guys weren't necessarily solely chasing fame. Like, I think they genuinely had an interest in getting to the bottom of the mystery. And unfortunately, that's something we have lost somewhat, in recent years, and with the explosion of like television shows on TV, about like Bigfooters and stuff like that. People are now much more interested in chasing like a star on the Animal Planet Walk of Fame or whatever.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. But there's also, obviously, it's such a huge field and such a huge world. And did you know ahead of time everybody that you were going to approach and interview, or did you sort of find that along the way as well?
I would say 90% of the people we interviewed I knew going into it. There were a few exceptions, like Peter Von Pittcomer, who I interviewed in episode 2, and then he pops up in a few more episodes after that. He was a filmmaker who made a movie called Sasquatch Odyssey in the 90s. And Peter now is like a huge, like a really huge name in the television industry, because he shoots all these like Discovery Channel documentaries and stuff. He's like an expert wildlife videographer, but he has a fascination with the subject. And I'd been a fan of his for a long time, but I'd never met him. So we just happened to be doing a film festival together in San Francisco, and I asked him in the lobby. It's like, hey, would you mind just like stepping over here for like 10 minutes and talking to me about like the Bigfoot subject? And he was totally on board with it. So there were a few cases like that where it was someone who I'd didn't know going into it. Mark Marcel I'd never met, and I'd only spoken to him through Facebook a couple times, and I got him involved as well. But a lot of these people I did know, going into it, and a lot of them, again, like I wasn't picking people based on their name recognition, their celebrity. It's strange that the series has become like one of the most successful things we've ever put out financially. It was an Amazon bestseller for 4 or 5 straight weeks. It's actually still in the bestseller category on documentary in horror. So I honestly thought this would be a huge flop, so I really wasn't going into it wanting to interview people because I thought they would help sell it. Like, I really just wanted to talk to people who I thought were knowledgeable about their particular area of interest. And
right.
So a lot of these people, they don't have some huge following or name recognition. And I picked them because I thought they were a good subject, someone, who'd have a lot to say about it. So that's how I picked everybody.
That's really cool. That's great. From watching the documentary, it seems like your own sort of opinion on the matter kind of goes, or you kind of toe the line a little bit. And sometimes you kind of going, you sort of lean one direction, lean the other. You had some experiences. It sounded like maybe some, I don't know, was it a howl or a growl or something that you heard out, or you didn't hear it? You were able to analyze it later and found it?
No,
when you were out.
We heard it. Unfortunately, I wasn't filming, but we had something throw a rock at us, and then, or not at us, but at a building nearby, and then start screaming in the woods, which it sounded like a gibbon. Laughter is like the best way we can put it. It sounded like a human scream followed by a gibbon laugh. It was a really, really bizarre thing. But so yeah, where I stand in this, I would say when we started making it, I was
sorry, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, when we started making it, I think I was at maybe like 30% that these things could be real, and now I'm probably more like 80% that there's a possibility they're out there. So I do tend to sort of get very skeptical about the subject, and I like sometimes my interest, or not interest, but my belief that these things could be real can wane. But I think anyone that's into the subject for any length of time is going to go through that. So unless I see one, you know, that's probably going to be the case.
Right. Is it hard for you sometimes when you're talking to, say, witnesses that, you know, I guess maybe for you, I mean, you're looking in these guys' eyes and you're getting some, I would imagine some pretty amazing, you know, heartfelt stories, and struggling with, you know, some of your own inner voice at times when you may have been, you know, more on the line or further away from the line in the skeptical region. Was there something that sort of, I guess, because what I'm asking you is, was there something that sort of, was there one experience in particular that started to lean you more towards that 80%? Was it a combination of things? What sort of pushed you back in that direction?
It was honestly everything that happened to us when we were in Oklahoma. Like episode 5, if you watch episode 5, it'll come into focus. What I mean by that is just everything that happened in there, in Area X, was so bizarre. And it was happening in a location that was so isolated from the outside world, and once you were in there, like it instantly became clear that there was no hoaxing going on in there, that it wasn't like locals, like, you know, pulling pranks on us or anything like that, which was, going into it, that's kind of what I expected it to be.
Right.
It was none of that. It was a combination of every single thing, all the different events that happened in Area X in that 2.5 days, and then it kind of culminated with that rock throw and scream. I mean, the scream we heard is very difficult to describe. And Adam, who was in Area X with me, he describes it pretty well in episode 5, but it's still very hard to put into words what it was we heard and why it could have that kind of effect on us.
Right.
You're in a place where there are only the people that you're with, and I know a single person we were with, and I knew their locations when we heard that scream, and none of them could have been perpetrating that.
Right.
And it was like very clearly like large lungs making this whoop and then the laugh, and that was one of the weirdest things about it. It was just such a strange experience. And I think I like replay that stupid noise in my head probably every day.
Wow. So did you at any point feel like you might have been in danger, or did you feel nervous at any point for your safety?
No, I mean, while we were in there, I definitely felt nervous because there were rattlesnakes that have adapted to no longer have rattles, and we saw like 2 black widows, including one that like ninja jumped into our tent on the first night. And you know, there's we kept finding like bear scat, and there was a mountain lion that had been seen on the hill behind our tent like 2 nights before. So I was nervous about the stuff we know is out there.
Right.
But like even when that thing threw the rock and laughed, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. It was nothing like that. I was super excited. Like when it happened, we were falling asleep. It was 3:00 in the morning, and I just started falling asleep. And this horrible migraine, and this rock just slams into this metal roof of an outbuilding, you know. And keep in mind, we're like 10 miles from the nearest paved road, 2.5 hours down this logging road into a valley where no one lives, where no one exists.
Right.
Like it's private. It's a massive private conservancy. And
no, I think that's the thing that I think, you know, you get to people get skeptical when they watch things on TV or on films, and I think it's hard sometimes for people to understand, like, out there in the middle of nowhere, you're not faking this, and nobody else. It's not like other people know where to go, where to find you, or they're just out in the middle of nowhere, just waiting for somebody to maybe be filming a documentary or be in the area just so they can scare them. It's just, it's easy for skeptics to kind of write stuff like that off, but when you're there in the moment and you're experiencing that kind of thing, and also the other thing is, you know, unless you're set up to mic something like that properly, it's like, you know, you can record something on an iPhone, and to you, it's, I mean, you can hear, you can almost feel the vibration of something, and that's, you know, or any kind of device, really. I'm just saying that I use iPhone just because that's something that people I think relate to when they might be out in the open. They might try to record something, but it doesn't capture all the sonic qualities of something like that you are experiencing. It's hard to translate some of that experience. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. Totally get it. That was like the most difficult thing to describe to people, is like why we were so I guess wowed by what had happened. Is like you're for someone to hoax that particular group, they would basically have to live in the woods behind their camp and be in there all the time, because this group's in there for 6 or 7 months out of the year, and they're extremely intelligent people. Like we were outgunned in terms of like intelligence by everyone in the group with us. Like, and Adam, who was with me, is a med school student, kind of a genius entrepreneur, but I mean, we're in there with like Daryl was military intelligence for like 25 years. Kathy Strain was in there with us. She's the tribal relations manager for the Stanislaus National Forest. She's, PhD. She's kind of a genius, and her husband is a genius in his own way. I mean, he's a paramedic. He was a firefighter paramedic for years. Flew helicopters and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, these people are not your like bumbling sort of redneck Bigfooters in the woods. They're not that at all. And so we were kind of aware these people have no reason to hoax us. And
right.
But the other thing about it is like the things that we documented and cataloged, and things that happened to us, and even like the wraparound and the scream. I don't think that's the type of stuff you would hoax. Like, you'd think if you were going to hoax something for a film crew, it would be something a little more wild, a sighting or like something screaming directly at us, not noises in the night when we're falling asleep and don't have any equipment or anything on us. So it was an experience, but that's kind of what moved the needle for me, was that one event.
That's cool. So when you're, I guess, what part of the process were you sort of interviewing people, and maybe, I mean, is there part of your brain going, I mean, like fighting whether or not this person's, what level of credibility? I mean, a lot of these people, obviously, you'll listen to them, you'll talk to them. They sound, like you said, really smart people, really credible people, and they're spending all their time doing this. Before you had that experience, are you fighting with yourself to kind of, I guess, figure out like what are these guys crazy?
Yeah. I mean, like, to an extent, when it comes to the NAWAC, which is the group that we were in there with, like, I've always done that with them. I'm always like, well, what could actually, like you're skeptical, all the skeptical responses you're having to what they're claiming, in terms of activity are coming and going through your mind while they're talking to you, because like the things they're saying seem so outlandish and over the top. Like the rain of rocks incident. Like what could be throwing rocks at the roof of this cabin for like 2 hours other than people, and you're trying to figure out, like, are they hearing like nuts falling from trees and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, to an extent, I think when it comes to them, you want to run through all those skeptical responses to things, because you don't necessarily want to just take every single thing at face value when it comes to these subjects. And at the same time, like when it comes to witnesses, most of the witnesses we've interviewed, no matter what, they 100% believe that what they're claiming happened. They believe it happened. So, and I know, most of the time that these people believe it happened. So it's almost irrelevant to me whether or not I'm not going to sit there when someone's telling their story and kind of try to explain it away. That's not really my approach to it. It's more about, I guess, the storytelling aspect of witness stories. But when it comes to something like investigators, I'm always going to be trying to approach it skeptically, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, it's a different beast altogether. And there's a lot of, there's a lot, like you said, there's a lot of investigators out there and a lot of people who are trying to make a name for themselves. And and it can feel like a very outlandish thing to be doing. How do you feel about what those guys in particular in Oklahoma are doing in terms of trying to kill one? And like, is that something that, like, do you have an opinion on that whole situation? Or do you kind of remain? Yeah, go ahead.
I've always, like, for me, I find it hard to really take a side in the kill or no kill debate, just because I don't even know if these things exist. But at the same time, I do believe, like, there's only one way to prove conclusively to science that Bigfoot exists, and that's to kill one. Like, you either kill one or find one, already dead, or capture one of these things alive. Like, that's basically the only way to do it. Because science demands a specimen, and you're either going to find a body or a piece of a body, or you're going to kill one.
Right.
So
yeah.
So that's kind of where I've always come down on it. Is I don't necessarily see the point in the debate, because I haven't seen one for myself, so I can't get into a debate on whether or not we should kill one. I have a hard time killing anything. I've never gone hunting, really. I've fished a few times. I'm not a hunter, so I myself would never be able to kill one, I don't think. But as far as, like, whether or not there's another way to prove it, I just don't believe there is. We've already got video and audio evidence, quote unquote evidence, out there, and
right.
science doesn't even give it a second thought. So. There's only one way to conclusively end the whole thing, and that's a body.
Totally. What in all of the other, I guess, research, and not just in Bigfoot in particular, is there anything else that sort of surprised you in when you were doing your research? Things that you might have started off thinking were maybe just a story, or the other way around. Maybe you thought there might be something more to it, and kind of came away disappointed. What things in all of your other research that you've done, some of the other films that you started to look into, I guess, became more real to you?
For like, as far as On the Trail of goes, like, I think the biggest eye-opening thing was probably just the scale of the United States, as ludicrous as that might sound, because I've traveled, like, since I was a kid. I've traveled all over the country, because my parents owned a bookstore when I was a kid, and we did book shows every weekend, so I traveled every weekend for most of my life. And so I grew up just traveling constantly, but this particular project, like, took me to places I'd never been before, and you get a sense of, like, the fact that there still is this wild, there are still wild lands across especially like the PNW, where you could definitely see some sort of animal, staying hidden. So that was probably my biggest sort of eye-opening takeaway from this particular project. As far as the films go, I think every single time we make one of these movies, I have a greater appreciation for history and the places where these stories are set. Like, Terror in the Skies, which is our next movie, is all about history. And it's kind of buried in a monster story, but it's there. Like, the subtext is there, and the theme of, like, remembering the past is there. And that's the thing about, like, I guess that's the thing about cryptid stories and paranormal stories is mainstream people, mainstream historians or whatever, and even just locally, historical societies and things, that they overlook these stories because they don't consider them factual reality. They think, well, it's a Bigfoot story, Bigfoot's not real, or it's a UFO story and UFOs don't exist. So don't even bother clipping those newspaper articles or whatever. And I think that's a shame, because regardless of the factual reality of these stories, they do play a huge role, in the history of the the areas and the communities where they happen, and they definitely play a massive role in the lives of people who have them happen to them. Like the regardless of what the actual truth is behind what happened, like whether someone saw a real monster or they made it up or they misidentified a bear or whatever, like that event plays a massive role in forming that person into who they are or who they become, and it does the same to the community where it happens. Minerva today is probably a lot different than it would have been if the Minerva monster case had never happened, because it impacts the lives of the people in that community when it actually takes place. Who knows what the ripple effects from that are? So I think it's really important. Like I think that's the biggest takeaway from everything we've done. When I'm done with it, it always comes down to the importance of telling these stories and remembering these stories, and that's one of the reasons I do love our films as opposed to some of the other like paranormal content out there. Is I do feel like so much of that stuff is just geared around investigations and like someone running through the woods with night vision on or whatever. And our films are much more focused on retelling these stories that are so important to the place where they happened.
Alan, you could easily lead this episode.
Whoops! Sorry, I was on mute. I was talking and I didn't even realize it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good, man.
Yeah, no.
I just wanted to just quickly throw in there like so many like questions ago, but one thing I noticed, Seth, too, with your film, real quick, is you guys, or you, I should say, whoever runs them, I'm assuming it's you, Seth, is the Kickstarter. I noticed every film, it seems, is funded by Kickstarter. Is there any particular reason why you are choosing a crowdfund?
Well, yeah, what we actually do is we crowdfund at the beginning of the year everything that's going to come out through STM over the course of that year. So, and we've done that since all the way back to 2015. We ran our first Kickstarter. We ran that Kickstarter because we didn't have the money to produce DVDs, and I think we asked for like $500 and we raised $6,500. So we started at $6,500, and the most recent campaign raised $57,000, I think it was. So yeah, that's literally, we wouldn't be able to do what we do without the Kickstarter. That's how we fund every single production that comes out, throughout the year under STM. That's how we fund those. And the good thing about, that is that you can see the growth. Like it's pretty apparent that the money being made on the Kickstarter is just going back into the films because the budgets continue to grow and get larger, and you're continuing to see like the effects grow on the films, and the look of everything continues to grow in quality and things like that. So we definitely utilize crowdfunding, and I'm glad we do. I think it's I always say it at the end of each campaign, it's like the most encouraging part of my year is seeing the crowdfunding reception that we receive each year. Every year it's more and more people backing and more money raised. I mean, this year was 450 people backed, which our first campaign was like, I think under 100 or just over 100. So, I mean, it's been a crazy growth. This year's growth from last year was 150 people difference. So that's great. Like that's just from like a morale standpoint, it's probably needed.
So, Seth, to touch on the budget that you mentioned, which was like $5,000 for On the Trail of Bigfoot, how do you divide the $35,000 goal on Kickstarter amongst the three films you mentioned earlier? Momo,
Yeah.
On the Trail, and Terror in the Skies.
Yeah. Well, On the Trail of, honestly, is probably entirely out of pocket because that movie was edited in January and the campaign launched in February. So any money raised from the Kickstarter probably went into just DVD production and and like posters and stuff like that. So the money would have been more than likely coming just from out of our, STM pockets. And then the money for the other two projects is just divvied up however we need to divvy up between those three titles. It just depends. Like, I think Terror is actually going to end up being a much larger budgeted movie than Momo. It's probably, I think so far it's going to end up being like the biggest budgeted film we've made so far. And some of that is just logistics. Like, it's very difficult to create flying creature effects practically. Like, it's basically impossible. So we had to get, CGI artists and animated sequences and things like that divvied up. So it all comes down to just wherever the money is needed, it ends up there. And 57K is what we earned or pulled in on the Kickstarter. Kickstarter takes a nice, lovely chunk of that. And then there's also the fact that some of that money goes back into producing the rewards for that Kickstarter. By the time we get to post-production on Momo, we will be into our own pockets, like STM pockets. The Kickstarter money will be gone. Pretty much every year, no matter how much we raise, we end up, just pulling from our own money to make the movies, which is fine because we're being supported by the audience that supports our films.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. I mean, as long as the audience enjoy your work, which they seem to, as you were mentioning, with the increase of backers, and it's just great to see that there is a big interest in these type of creatures or monsters or the eyewitness stories to really learn more on a subject that maybe nobody else have really thought of. Like, another thing that I thought was really cool that I believe you were kind of mentioning in like talking with Alan here, and I think in the documentary, is that theory between the UFOs and the Bigfoot, where I'm drawing a blank right now, but somebody was mentioning the fact that they like saw a Bigfoot walk onto like a UFO or some type of ship. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting take on it.
Yeah, there's all sorts of like theories on what Bigfoot is, and some people are very staunchly in their camp. You've got the flesh and blood undiscovered primate, theory, and then you've got the people that are convinced Bigfoot's some sort of alien, and then you've got people who believe it's a dimensional being, and never the twain shall meet because they all hate each other. like they're all in their individual camps, and they're very staunchly supportive of their own personal opinion, unfortunately. So that means that you get a very contentious community full of people who disagree with each other over what they believe Bigfoot actually is. And it's that way. It's kind of that way in any community. You have the same thing in like the UFO world, or ghosts and the supernatural. So it's pretty common. It's just, I think it's an unfortunate byproduct of the whole thing.
Have you had any encounters with anybody whose ego was maybe getting away with themselves, or any of the more odd people in the community?
For sure. Like, I think the thing I've noticed is actually a pushback against the episode 5, the NAWAC Pro Kill episode, which is like, it seems like people are very they can get very up in arms over the fact that they're out there, trying to kill a Bigfoot, as if the fact that I made an episode about that is in some way like an affront to them personally, or
it doesn't change. You're reporting on something. It doesn't even it's odd to deny the fact that they would exist. In a documentary.
But I mean,
so I don't
like by the same token, I've had people who are flesh and blood Bigfoot believers who didn't like episode 3 where Stan Gordon talks about UFOs and Bigfoot because they think that somehow that's going to damage the credibility of this subject in like the eyes of scientists, and I'm saying, well, I mean, scientists better not be watching on independent film miniseries called "On the Trail of Bigfoot" for evidence of Bigfoot, because it's not going to happen.
Right.
So, you know, my job first and foremost is always just to document things, and that means I'm going to throw my own personal opinions out the door and kind of approach it objectively, while hopefully integrating all aspects of the subject. I mean, this was supposed to be a very concise look at the entire history of Bigfoot, and that means you're going to have to involve things like, you know, the paranormal aspect of the subject.
Right. The woo, is that what they call it? The woo?
That's what the woo, or like flute players, I believe, is another one.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's such a big topic, and you know, I think such a difficult thing to undertake, and I think you did a great job, you know, navigating that, and also, you know, making the experience uniquely personal for you, so that so it's sort of I think that in doing that and putting yourself in it and making it your sort of journey through the whole process, it allows you to kind of touch on all those things without sort of getting bogged down or buried underneath all that stuff. It's a lot of stuff out there, and you could very easily drown in it, especially going into a multi-part series on the subject. There's just so much to get involved with. But it was a great look at all of it, and you handled it really well.
Awesome, thank you.
What do you think a Sasquatch or Bigfoot or Yeti is?
Oh yeah, I'm in the undiscovered primate camp. I mean, like, I feel like that's where the predominant, you know, that seems to be where the evidence leads. Like, if you boil the entire history of the subject down, and you really, like, boil it down and look at it, you're seeing people reporting some sort of shy creature that behaves in a way that we can sort of you know, draw a parallel to known primates. The predominant number of reports do not involve paranormal aspects. They seem to point to a creature that behaves like a primate. So that's where I'm at on it. You know, that doesn't explain away the paranormal side of things, though. You know, like, that's definitely a thing, and people definitely seem to have those experiences occasionally. It's one of the great mysteries of the whole thing. It's one of the aspects of it that keep you scratching your head. You don't know, you know, what's behind all this, really. But my personal theory is it's some sort of undiscovered primate.
People have come back with, like, hair samples from trying to find Bigfoot, and 10% of that has been known to come back as unknown. Do you think we'll ever figure out what that unknown is, or do you think whatever it is already, like, extinct?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Like, the hair sample thing seems really difficult to go off of, because they need like some sort of, I forget. I just had this conversation with Cliff Barrickman and a guy named Todd Disotell last weekend. We were in Maine for the International Cryptozoology Conference, and there was an argument taking place between two of these guys about DNA samples, and it was fascinating to listen to, because I'm kind of a moron when it comes to like DNA and all that. So it was fascinating to listen to them talk about it, because, like, it all comes down to that idea that we need a specimen. Like, you need a body, because you need something to identify that hair with. Otherwise, it's always going to come back as, like, unidentified, and there's always going to be some, I guess, room for error on what that could be. You know, I don't necessarily buy into the idea that Bigfoot was here at one point and now it's extinct. Like, I know people who do think that maybe, like, in the 1950s, when the first sightings were happening, that was sort of first sightings of the modern era. That was sort of like the last vestiges of some sort of now extinct Bigfoot population. I don't necessarily buy into that. So like, the fact is, I just don't know. You know, like, I hope we get some sort of conclusive evidence at some point soon, but I also don't necessarily think that is going to happen.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's every time I hear something about like the samples coming back either as contaminated, or we always hear it's 90% human and 10% unknown. But I mean, every time I hear we need a body, it's just like, how do we get that body when no matter what we do, if we get a body. And what I mean by that is like, we hear stories of hunters that kill a Bigfoot, but then either another Bigfoot that is nearby comes and grabs the dead Bigfoot and carries them away, or we get the hunter has called either the police, the game warden, somebody, and then when they tell them that they shot like this Bigfoot Sasquatch, we always get told that, there's a black car with tainted black windows that come up and just pretty much to say, you can't talk about this anymore. And then that's it. And then, the body is gone. So I think trying to get a body is definitely going to be the hardest part, I think, for sure, until we reach the point of it being into the public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Alan, is there anything you have to ask Seth? Because I think you pretty much touched on everything I think I was going to even ask, and Tessa. So, is there anything
sorry,
else?
guys. I hogged the interview. Sorry, guys.
No. You're doing good. You're doing good.
We were actually sitting here while we were muted. We're just like, maybe we should let Alex take the lead on the next one.
No, you did great.
No, Seth, I think you did a great job, man. I really think it's an impressive film. I hope everybody goes out and checks it out. It's I think anybody who's got any kind of interest in it, I think even, just people who have no knowledge at all on the topic, I think you've done a great job in getting people into the topic and kind of showing sides of the debate and I think it'll be entertaining for people and knowledgeable, informative for people who, either who have a little more knowledge on the topic or people who are just getting into it. So, great job on all of that. And, when does the next film hit? When does
Terror comes out on June 7th. And then Momo is out, probably very early October. And then, after that, 2020 is like the 5-year anniversary of Small Town Monsters. We're putting out The Mothman Legacy, which is a sequel to The Mothman at Point Pleasant. And we're putting out The Mark of the Bell Witch, and we're putting out On the Trail of UFOs. So next year we'll be just as busy, if not more busy than this year.
Wow. Well, happy early anniversary, I will say right now. So,
thanks, man.
And for those listening, Seth, where can people find On the Trail of Bigfoot if they are interested in watching?
Yeah, it's on Vimeo on demand, VidiSpace, Amazon, and smalltownmonsters.com. You can buy DVDs and stuff like that if you're into physical media. So as of right now, those are the best places to catch the mini.
Awesome. Very cool. And Alan, are you all set just to make sure?
Yeah, it's great. Okay. No, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank
you.
Cool,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Seth, again. Alan, thank you for your help. And Tessa, thank you for your questions as well.
You mean my 2 cents?
Yeah, my 2 cents as well. So, I mean, like I said, I think Alan definitely needs to take the lead next time. He was doing really good. So, Bravo, he should be the host of this now.
Yeah, bravo, good sir.
Anyway, Seth, we can't wait to see what is in store for you guys, definitely, especially in June 7th, you said, for Terror in the Skies, and then sometime in early October for Momo. Both look pretty interesting. And I also noticed that the other films of yours are on Amazon Prime as well. So I got more stuff to check you out. So, and just to throw it out there too, Seth, is that you're more than welcome to come back on the show to talk with us monsters and creatures and any of your projects again.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Hey, you're very welcome. And for those out there, thank you for listening. Hopefully your Bigfoot insights have increased to make you want to go onto the trail of finding Bigfoot. Wait a minute. I mean the trail of Bigfoot. There you go. Make sure you check it out and just have a good old time because, you know, it's pretty much knocked down into 6 mini episodes, about 30, 35 minutes, depending on the episode, but it's well worth it, full of information, and it's just incredible with some of the awesome captures that these investigators that Seth have talked with have caught, especially the raining roof audio. That was really cool. Or the raining rocks. I forgot how it was titled.
Cool,
yeah. That was real cool. But yeah, so thank you again, everybody, for listening. Seth, thank you again. Alan, thank you. And thank you again to my lovely fiance. And don't forget, people, make sure that you are armed. Do not go into the hole. Wait, what? Don't go into the woods alone, and make sure that there's not a Bigfoot that is following you home. And as always, people, stay scared.